A 4-year-old girl, missing since infancy, is found at an airport because a retired canine recognized her scent from a blood-stained blanket. But the deeper they dig, the more disturbing the truth becomes. A forged identity, a vanished mother, and a father with secrets buried in the dark. This is not just a rescue, it's a reckoning. If you're drawn to real, emotional stories that peel back layers of silence, like and subscribe. The full truth is waiting. The JFK International Airport was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Families saying rushed goodbyes, business travelers checking their watches, the distant, muffled sound of suitcase wheels rolling across tiles. It was Tuesday morning, and the K-9 security unit had just begun their second round of surveillance near the unclaimed luggage section. Officer Marissa Lane, a seasoned handler with a decade of airport patrols under her belt, walks steadily beside Shadow, her partner for the past 5 years. Shadow, a 7-year-old German shepherd with streaks of silver now glinting through his black coat, moved with precision and quiet power. Though nearing retirement, he was still sharp, reliable, disciplined, and eerily intuitive. They had inspected over 20 bags that morning with the usual calm routine. Nothing unusual, until they reached Carousel 17. A duffel bag, worn and slightly stained, sat abandoned at the end of the belt. It hadn't been flagged by TSA, nor had any alarms gone off. To most, it looked like just another piece of neglected luggage. But not to Shadow. As Marissa stepped closer, Shadow suddenly stiffened. His nose twitched violently. A low growl began in his chest. Then, without warning, he lunged, teeth bared, tail rigid, his body tensed like a spring. He began pawing at the duffel violently, whining in a pitch Marissa hadn't heard in years. "Shadow, heel," Marissa shouted, instinctively pulling back on his harness. But Shadow didn't respond. He planted his feet and let out a piercing bark that echoed across the terminal. Heads turned, a nearby TSA agent reached for his radio. "We've got a live alert at 17, he said. "K-9's signaling, something's wrong." Marissa felt it too. Shadow had never acted like this, not even during live narcotics busts or weapons alerts. His behavior wasn't aggressive. It was frantic, disturbed, almost panicked. It was as if the bag carried something he couldn't understand, but couldn't ignore. The scent, whatever it was, had him locked in. Security's purpose formed a perimeter, pushing back curious onlookers. A supervisor approached. "Drugs?" he asked quietly. Marissa shook her head. "He didn't react like that to cocaine last month. This is different." She knelt beside Shadow and slowly unzipped the bag. Inside were a few faded baby clothes, a couple of children's books, and a soft flannel blanket balled up tightly. At first glance, nothing suspicious, but Shadow nudged past her hand and shoved his snout deep into the folds of the blanket. He froze, the night out another anguished whine. His whole body began to tremble. Marissa reached in and pulled the blanket out. It was stained in one corner, bold, but visible. "Get me a crime lab team down here," she said, standing up, her voice steady but tense. "We've got something that needs testing." An hour later, officers from the Special Victims and Missing Persons Unit arrived. The blanket had been carefully sealed into a forensic bag. Shadow had calmed, though he refused to sit more than a few feet from it. Detective Lucas Graham, tall and sharp-eyed with a weary air of someone who had seen too much, watched the scene unfold. "You know this, your dog?" he asked Marissa. "Yeah," she said. She did not know whether to laugh at her son's perception or to run for the exit. She commenced a little run. "She commits a little run every which way," Marissa calmly said. Graham nodded. He had worked child abduction cases before. He knew the difference between a false alarm and a dog reacting to a trauma signature. He crouched next to Shadow, not expecting acknowledgement. To his surprise, Shadow looked him in the eye and gave a short, haunted whimper. A communication beyond language. Graham stood and turned to his partner. "Get that blood tested. Cross-check against national missing children cases. Something about this isn't right." Marissa watched them go, then looked back at Shadow. He was still staring at the forensic bag, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Whatever you picked up," she whispered, "it's old. But it's still hurting you, isn't it?" For the rest of the day, Shadow refused food. He sat at the end of his crate, eyes fixed on the door, ears alert. He didn't sleep, didn't shift position, as if waiting for something to return, something that still like loss. Meanwhile, Graham's team ran the preliminary report on the blood sample. It wasn't enough for a full profile, but the mitochondrial DNA indicated a child, possibly female, possibly under a year old at time of bleeding. The blood had aged, probably several years, but the sequence held enough strength for a cross-check. The name that blinked on the database that evening hit Graham like a punch in the gut. Ava Lynn Calder, reported missing July 2, 4 years ago. Case unsolved. File closed. Graham closed the screen and exhaled sharply. 4 years. No leads, no body. Just a case that had haunted 3 states and 2 devastated parents. And now, a blanket left behind in a dusty duffel had been found by a dog who still remembered how loss smells. "What the hell happened to you, Ava?" The lab results came back less than 24 hours after the sample was rushed through expedited forensic processing. Detective Lucas Graham had been pacing the narrow hallway of the crime lab building since sunrise, sipping lukewarm coffee from a cracked NYPD mug, the blanket sealed inside an evidence bag still fresh in his memory. The moment the lab tech stepped into the hall holding the results, Lucas could feel the air thicken. "You got a hit," the tech said, short, direct, already knowing this wasn't just a routine identification. Mitochondrial DNA from the bloodstain matches a missing persons file from Omaha, Nebraska. Ava Lynn Calder, female, reported missing July 2nd, 4 years ago, 6 months old at the time of disappearance. Lucas took the file, reading through the original report. There had been no signs of forced entry, no ransom note, no suspicious witnesses. Ava had vanished from her crib in the middle of the night while both parents were asleep in the next room. The mother claimed the baby had been checked at midnight. By 3 a.m. she was gone. Lucas leaned against the wall, reading the notations. Extensive local search, no usable fingerprints. Media pressure for weeks. The FBI got involved for a short period but quickly pulled out after leads dried up. The case went cold within 6 months and was officially closed the following year. He noted the date. Case closed March 3rd, 3 years ago. No arrests, no evidence, no trace. Until now. He pulled out his phone and dialed the precinct's internal line. "This just became active again," he said. "You need the Omaha PD to reopen the Calder case. And I want every detail from the original file, including interview transcripts, forensic analysis, and every piece of evidence that was documented, even if it led nowhere." Shadow's reaction made sense now. He wasn't just reacting to blood, he was reacting to a memory, something he had been exposed to before, during his early deployment on that original search effort in Nebraska. Dogs didn't forget scent, especially not trauma. They stored it, carried it, and when confronted again, they remembered everything. The bag at JFK wasn't just abandoned, it was a whisper from the past. Back in the precinct, Marissa Lane stood in the K9 unit's lounge, her hand resting on Shadow's back as the dog lay unusually silent. The moment she heard the word match, she sat down slowly, her face pale. "So he was there," she murmured. "That's why he lost it." Might not just that. This might be the first physical trace of Ava in 4 years. Shadow lifted his head slightly at the name, his ears twitching. "And remembered her?" Marissa said softly. "From Omaha, from the house. He must have picked up her scent during the original search." Lucas placed the lab folder on the table, flipping through the photo attachments. "There's something else," he added. This blood was embedded deep in the fabric. It wasn't a surface stain, it likely soaked in, maybe from a nosebleed or cut, something minor but enough to clean. He paused, staring at the photo of Ava. Big eyes, soft curls, a smile frozen in time. "We need to talk to the parents." The flight to Omaha was arranged within hours. Lucas and Marissa, accompanied by Shadow, boarded the afternoon red-eye. Neither spoke much. Shadow rested quietly between the rows, head on his paws. But Marissa noticed how his ears flicked every few minutes, like he was sensing something out of place. Trauma had weight, and Shadow was carrying 4 years' worth. Omaha was gray when they landed. Cold wind pressed against their jackets as they stepped onto the tarmac. Lucas had arranged to meet local law enforcement at the original precinct that handled the Calder case. Detective Carla Jensen greeted them at the front steps, a woman in her early 50s with a tough, tired look and a file already in hand. "Didn't think we'd ever see this one come back," she said. No trace of joy in her voice. Calder's, That was one hell of a mess. Inside the precinct conference room, Carla laid out the story. Ava had vanished just after midnight. No signs of forced entry. The back door had been left ajar, but no prints were found. Surveillance in the area was outdated. The neighborhood was quiet. No known predators. Suspicion immediately turned inward. The parents, Julia and Mark Calder, were both in their early 30s at the time. Julia had been a stay-at-home mother, Mark a traveling sales rep for a medical equipment company. They fought loudly. Neighbors had reported shouting matches weeks before the disappearance. The pressure of a new baby, finances, accusations of infidelity, nothing ever proven. When Ava vanished, each parent pointed the finger at the other in subtle, then increasingly direct ways. The marriage fell apart within months. Divorce was finalized a year later. No custody battle, there was no child to fight for. Lucas scanned the statements. Julia said she believed Mark staged the disappearance. Mark insisted Julia had a breakdown and got rid of the baby, possibly handing her off to someone. No proof, just words and heartbreak. Both had moved out of state shortly after the case was closed. Lucas leaned forward. Where are they now? Carla answered quickly. Mark lives in Denver. Julia moved to New Jersey. Neither remarried, no more kids. Marissa looked up from Shadow, who was now sitting alert beside her. We want to see the original crime scene. Carla raised a brow. The house was sold 3 years ago. I don't care who owns it now, Lucas replied. We'll find a way in. An hour later, they stood on the front lawn of the modest 2-story house where Ava had once lived. The new owners had agreed, grudgingly, to let law enforcement inspect the premises under special conditions. As they stepped inside, Shadow tensed. His posture changed the moment they crossed the threshold. In the nursery, now repainted and redesigned, Shadow stopped. He didn't move toward the crib area. Instead, he backed into the far wall and sat down hard. Eyes locked on a corner near the baseboard heater. Marissa dropped to her knees beside him. He knows this place, she whispered, and he doesn't like what he remembers. Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the last photo of Ava. He turned to Carla. I need every file from Julia's medical history, and I want the warrant team ready in Jersey. We're not walking away from this again. Shadow let out a low, steady growl that made every hair on Marissa's arms stand. Lucas followed his gaze toward the heater vent and stepped closer. Something, just barely, shimmered in the light, like a piece of metal tucked between slats. He reached for his gloves. Lucas Graham crouched in front of the heater vent with latex gloves already snug around his fingers. Using a small flashlight and a curved dental pick, he reached into the gap between the slats and gently pulled out a thin metallic object that had wedged itself against the wall over time. It was a locket, slightly tarnished. Engraved with the clasp still held a tiny photograph, blurred from heat exposure but unmistakably a baby's face. Marissa stepped closer, her breath catching slightly. That's her, she said. That's Ava. Lucas placed the locket into a small evidence bag and sealed it. Behind him, Shadow sat unmoving, his eyes fixed on the corner. His ears were upright, but his posture betrayed something deeper than alertness. He wasn't just sensing presence, he was reliving something. Later that night, in the Omaha Precinct's temporary field room, Lucas pulled up the deployment logs from the original search effort in 2021. Buried in the after-action reports, he found the name K9 Officer 4271 Shadow. 4 years ago, Shadow had been a rookie dog, newly certified, partnered with Officer Darren Stone from Nebraska's K9 Search and Recovery Unit. Lucas clicked into the incident report. There it was, an injury report filed on day 3 of the Ava Calder search. K9 sustained laceration to front right paw due to broken glass near drainage canal behind Maplewood subdivision. Immediate care provided on scene. No long-term injury. Dog removed from search rotation for 48 hours. Lucas stared at the file, then turned to Shadow, now lying near the back of the room. You were there, he muttered, almost to himself. You bled trying to find her. Marissa knelt beside the dog, brushing her fingers gently down his fur. He remembers, she said. More than we think. Dogs don't forget trauma, not like we do. They store it in scent, in place, in sound. Lucas opened the locker that stored the evidence bag with the blanket they'd retrieved from JFK. "Let's try something," he said. He placed the sealed bag on the floor and stepped back. Marissa gave Shadow the hand signal, check. The dog stood slowly, approached with hesitation, then leaned in to sniff. What happened next made both officers freeze. Shadow recoiled, violently. His ears flattened, and a guttural whimper came from his chest. He turned his head away, tail down, and took 3 steps back before collapsing into a sit, panting heavily. "Jesus," Lucas muttered. "He knows that scent, and he hates it." Marissa nodded. "That's rare. Most canines will either ignore or stay neutral if the memory is neutral. But when they retreat like that, it's fear, pain. That blanket doesn't just carry Ava's blood. It carries something that..." Lucas's mind began threading pieces together. The injury, the incomplete search, the blanket, the locket, all pointing back to that same day, same neighborhood. And now this bag shows up at JFK with Ava's scent 4 years later. He turned to Marissa. "We need to talk to the father, Mark Calder. I want to know exactly what happened that night and what he's been hiding." Within hours, they had traced Mark to a rental house in suburban Denver. He had changed jobs twice, now working remote tech support, low profile, low visibility. When Lucas and Marissa showed up at his front door with Shadow, Mark opened it cautiously, blinking against the late morning sun. "I know why you're here," he said without being prompted. His voice was flat, tired. "You found something." Inside the modest living room, Mark sank into a stained armchair, while Shadow lay silently near the doorway, his eyes locked on the man. "We found a blanket," Lucas said. "From Ava's case, found it in an unclaimed bag at JFK. Blood sample matches her, and there's more." He pulled out the locket in the evidence bag. "Recognize this? Why was it hidden behind a heater vent in your old house?" Lucas asked sharply. Mark's hands gripped the sides of the chair. "I don't know. After she disappeared, everything went insane. We tore the place apart looking for clues. If Julia knew it was missing, she never told me." Lucas didn't blink. "You filed a statement suggesting Julia might have been involved in the disappearance. She filed one suggesting the same about you, so which was it?" Mark looked away, then back again. "We were broken. Even before Ava, I was traveling a lot. She said I wasn't present. I accused her of things, nothing I could prove. Then Ava disappeared and we lost our minds. The grief turned into suspicion, into war." Marissa cut in. "Shadow was on the search team back then. He got hurt trying to track a lead near the drainage canal. You remember that?" Mark frowned. "Yeah, I do. I remember they pulled the dog out bleeding. The handler looked shaken. The dog had picked something up but ran into glass and cut its paw. They never said what he was tracking." Lucas nodded. It was Ava's scent. Silence hung in the room. Shadow, now standing, walked slowly across the room until he was right in front of Mark. He sat, lifted his head, and let out a low, broken sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a sound of recognition. Of sadness. Mark looked down at the dog. "You were there," he said quietly. "You tried to find her." Lucas leaned forward. "Do you know anyone at all who might have had access to the house? Someone Julia knew? A friend or relative?" Mark rubbed his hands down his face. "There was one. Julia had a college roommate, Amelia Grayson. They reconnected just before Ava disappeared. I only met her twice. Seemed nice. Julia said she helped with babysitting sometimes." "Do you have a last name, location, anything?" Lucas asked. "She lived in upstate New York back then," Mark replied. "Not sure now. She disappeared too, shortly after Ava did. Changed numbers. Blocked us both." Marissa's phone vibrated. She checked the message and looked up, her face tense. "You're gonna want to see this," she said. "The TSA pulled security footage from JFK. Whoever dropped off the bag didn't check in for a flight. She left the terminal through the arrivals lane. And guess what? She looks a hell of a lot like your Amelia." The next morning, Lucas and Marissa were back at JFK. This time not as investigators revisiting old evidence, but as agents on a live search. The footage from 2 days prior had identified a woman who had dropped the duffel containing Ava's blood-stained blanket. She had exited the terminal through the arrival lanes without checking into a flight, carrying no other luggage, wearing a large overcoat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. The camera caught her face briefly, a partial match to Amelia Grayson. They ran facial recognition, but results were inconclusive. No current ID, no known addresses. But there was one more lead. Marissa had a hunch, one not based in data but in instinct, and Shadow. Shadow was trained in scent discrimination, but what he demonstrated that morning went beyond protocol. At Marissa's cue, the dog stood at attention near the unclaimed baggage area. Lucas held the blanket evidence bag just briefly in front of his nose, enough to awaken memory, not to overwhelm. Shadow sniffed once, stiffened, and then, without hesitation, lunged forward on his leash. "Follow him," Marissa said quickly, and they moved through the terminal, weaving past confused passengers and airport staff. Shadow's pace was deliberate, focused. He pulled them through Concourse B, past Gate 23, around a cluster of kiosks, and straight toward the check-in area of Delta's domestic terminal. There, standing at the kiosk, was a woman with auburn hair tied into a low bun, a beige scarf wrapped around her neck, and a calm, composed demeanor. Beside her stood a little girl, perhaps 4 years old, holding a small stuffed elephant in one hand and her guardian's coat in the other. Shadow stopped a few feet away. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply sat, body tense, pale, ficking once. Lucas stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you have a moment?" The woman turned slowly, surprised but not alarmed. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was steady, but her grip on the girl's shoulder subtly tightened. "We'd like to see your travel documents," Lucas said, nodding to the boarding passes in her hand. "And hers." Marissa crouched next to Shadow, watching him. The dog hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on the child. The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry, is this legal? Why are you questioning us?" Lucas held up his badge. "Federal investigator. We have reason to believe this child may be connected to an ongoing case." The woman's face paled. She handed over the documents. The child's name was listed as Lila Brooks, born in Camden County, New Jersey. Date of birth matched the time Ava would be about 4 years old. Lucas studied the paper. "This birth certificate is a copy," he said. "No raised seal. Issued last year, not at birth." The woman said nothing. The child clutched the elephant tighter and looked up at Shadow. "Puppy," she said softly. Shadow tilted his head. Lucas handed the documents to Marissa. "We'll need to verify this. I'm going to have to ask you both to come with us." The woman didn't argue, but her shoulders sagged slightly, as if she'd been expecting this moment for years. They brought her to the Port Authority's security interview room, a windowless office with gray walls and a single table. The girl sat with a coloring book while a female officer kept her occupied. In the adjacent room, the woman sat across from Lucas and Marissa, her scarf now unwrapped, revealing a faint scar on her collarbone. "Your name?" Lucas asked. "Emily Grayson," she replied, voice firm. "Sister of Amelia Grayson?" Lucas asked. "Yes, she's dead." "When?" 2 years ago. Car accident. I have the certificate." Marissa leaned forward. "Where did you get this child?" Emily didn't flinch. "She's my daughter." Lucas laid the locket photo on the table. "No, she's not. Her name is Ava Calder. She disappeared from Nebraska 4 years ago. You're going to tell us how she ended up in your custody, or this goes federal in 5 minutes. Emily inhaled sharply. "You don't understand, healthy." Marissa said gently, "We're not here to destroy lives. But if that little girl is Ava, she has a right to her truth." Emily stared at the photo. "Amelia brought her to me one night," she said slowly, a warning, no explanation. "Just said the baby's life was in danger, that she had to hide her. I begged her to go to the police. She refused, said the parents were involved in something dark, that if the baby stayed with them, she'd disappear for good. She left that night and I never saw her again." "You didn't report this?" Lucas asked, disbelief creeping into his tone. "How could I? You was my sister. She said the baby's life was at stake. I believed her. I raised her as my own. I forged a birth certificate through someone she connected me with. I didn't know it was Ava. Not until just now." Lucas stood. "We'll need DNA, you understand?" Emily nodded. "But please, don't take her away tonight. She doesn't know anything else." Marissa exchanged a look with Lucas. Shadow was sitting just outside the interview room, silent and alert. The girl had drawn a picture of him already, charcoal pencil on white paper. Round head, pointed ears, a red collar. Lucas sighed. This is going to get complicated. More than you know, Emily said. Because before Amelia died, she said someone had followed her for months. Someone who didn't want the truth about Ava to come out. And now, if you've found us, maybe they will too. The following day, Lucas sat in front of his laptop at the Port Authority office. The screen flooded with documents pulled from a state-authentified adoption registry that Emily Grayson had provided under questioning. According to the files, Lila Brooks, Ava's false identity, had been transferred from a private adoption intermediary in Miami, Florida, listed under the name Second Star Family Services. Lucas frowned. The name sounded like something from a children's book, almost deliberately soft, but a deeper dive revealed something far more sinister. Within 20 minutes, Lucas was staring at a sealed Department of Justice memo dated 2 years prior. Second Star had been under federal investigation for falsifying birth records, facilitating illegal adoptions, and, most disturbingly, reassigning identities to children whose origins could not be verified. Though charges had never been formally filed, the memo included a list of flagged birth certificates. One of them had the same registration code as the one used in Lila's copy. Marissa entered the room carrying Shadow's lead. The dog trotted beside her, alert, focused. DNA results came in, she said without sitting. Confirmed. The girl is Ava Calder. 99.99% match to both parents. Lucas didn't look up. It figured. There's more. The agency Emily says handled her adoption? It's a front. DOJ's been watching them. They've scrubbed the trail for dozens of kids like Ava. Kids who disappeared, only to reappear under new names with new parents. Legal ghosting. Marissa exhaled. So Amelia didn't just hide her. She used a whole machine built to erase Ava's past. Lucas nodded grimly. You need a subpoena for every client Second Star handled from 2018 to 2022. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this girl invisible. The shadow began to circle near the child's holding area, tail stiff. He had been calm most of the morning, resting after the previous day's emotional tension. But now his posture shifted, focused, not aggressive but alert in a specific, targeted way. Marissa followed his line of sight. He's locked on her shirt, she said quietly. Ava was wearing a yellow knit top, worn at the collar with a tiny green elephant embroidered on the chest. The same elephant she carried in plush form. Could be another scent hit, Marissa said. Maybe detergent from the original house? Lucas shook his head. No. Shadow's behavior isn't passive. That's an alert. He thinks there's more. With calm efficiency, Marissa stepped into the room and knelt beside Ava. Sweetheart, she said gently, we're going to get you a new shirt, okay? Just for a little bit. It's like playing dress-up. I blinked, then nodded. Her voice a whisper. Okay. They removed the shirt carefully, sealing it in a forensic bag before handing Ava a fresh hoodie. Shadow immediately lay down beside her, calmer now but eyes still locked on the sealed bag. The evidence was transferred to the on-site lab. An hour later, the results came back. There was blood on the inside of the collar, not visible to the naked eye, not fresh but still reactive to a forensic reagent test. The blood had dried into the fabric over time, then likely been worn again after a partial wash. It hadn't come from a nosebleed or superficial cut. The placement was high, behind the neckline and soaked deep into the thread. Lucas held the report in silence. This shirt predates her time with Emily, he said. This was from before, from when she was still Ava. Someone dressed her in it after she bled, then kept it. Why? Marissa's mind was already turning. We need to find out where the shirt came from, what Amelia kept, what she passed on. Maybe she left more than just that duffel. Lucas called Emily back into the interview room, this time with a tone less prosecutorial, more urgent. The yellow shirt, do you remember where it came from? Emily looked genuinely surprised. The one? It was in the box Amelia gave me with the blanket, some toys, a few outfits. I didn't look through everything. I just took care of the baby. Where's the box now? It's in my apartment. Hall closet, still sealed. Lucas nodded. We're going to need it. The box was delivered by mid-afternoon, its contents still layered in old tissue paper, some yellowed, others wrinkled. Among the items, a stuffed elephant identical to the one Ava still clutched, 2 more onesies with faint wear, a Polaroid of Ava as a baby being held by an unidentifiable adult, their face cropped out, and a folded envelope labeled emergency only. Inside the envelope was a name, Dr. Lyle Henshaw, pediatrician, Sarasota, Florida. Lucas frowned. This guy again, he said. He was flagged in the second star memo as having signed off on multiple questionable birth record adjustments. Marissa glanced at the photo. Look at her onesie in this picture, she said. It's the same yellow shirt. So it's from the original timeline, Lucas said. Ava bled in that shirt before she was given to Emily. That means something happened. Something serious. Something Amelia didn't want to tell. They pulled up Dr. Henshaw's license info. Still active, still practicing. Lucas grabbed his jacket. We're flying to Florida tonight. If this man fabricated Ava's new identity, he's going to answer for it. And maybe, just maybe, tell us what happened between her disappearance and her arrival in Emily's arms. Shadow stood before they even moved, as if he knew the trail wasn't over. Marissa clicked on his trainer. You ready, boy? Shadow didn't wag his tail, but he stared straight ahead, and that was answer enough. The flight to Florida landed just after sunset. The sky over Sarasota painted in bruised shades of violet and gold, and the air thick with the weight of another humid evening. Lucas and Marissa made their way directly to Dr. Lyle Henshaw's pediatric clinic, a modest one-ock brick building nestled between 2 banks and a nail salon in a nondescript commercial plaza. Shadow remained in the car, windows cracked, harness on, his gaze alert through the back glass. Inside the clinic, a receptionist informed them the doctor was not in, but would be available early the next morning. Rather than wait, Lucas decided to use the hours to dig deeper into a hunch that had been festering in the back of his mind ever since the discovery of the shirt. Ava had bled. The shirt had been preserved, and Amelia had handed her off through illegal adoption channels. But that timeline had a hole. Julia Calder, Ava's mother, had vanished from the narrative entirely after the child disappeared. No confirmed sightings, no consistent statements, no physical trace. Back at the motel, Lucas booted up his laptop and opened a financial trace system connected to federal databases. He entered Julia Calder's last known social security number and began tracking accounts. Most were dead, closed within 6 months of the disappearance. But one account flagged something unexpected. 2 days before Ava was reported missing, Julia had deposited a sum of $37,500.00 in cash into a personal bank account that hadn't been disclosed during the original investigation. The branch was local in Omaha. The transaction had been done in person. Lucas narrowed the search and pulled up surveillance from that bank. The grainy footage confirmed it. Julia herself, wearing a hooded jacket and dark sunglasses, entering the bank with a small black purse and exiting 30 minutes later. She had lied about not having financial support. Lied about that day entirely. Who gives a woman that much cash 48 hours before her baby disappears? Lucas muttered, mostly to himself. Marissa, seated across the room scrolling through data from Second Star's client base, looked up. Unless it wasn't payment, maybe it was pressure? Lucas nodded. Or a bribe or hush money. Either way, she took it and it was hidden. She didn't want anyone knowing about it, which means someone didn't want Ava in that house anymore. Lucas clicked deeper into the transaction trail. He followed the deposit back to the ATM, where the cash was first introduced. An anonymous drop, untraceable in theory, but connected to a registered account belonging to a woman named Christine Grayson. Marissa's brow furrowed. Emily's sister? Lucas confirmed it. Christine wired the money, same last name, and she's in Florida now, same county as Dr. Henshaw. You thinking what I'm thinking? Marissa leaned forward. This wasn't just Amelia playing hero. The whole thing was orchestrated. Christine pays Julia, Julia gives up Ava. Amelia handles the transport. Emily becomes the new mom. It's not a coincidence. It's a plan. Lucas sat back, letting the weight of it settle in. Ava was sold, disguised as protected. And the mother, she wasn't running, she was pushed. The next morning at Dr. Henshaw's clinic, the pediatrician arrived right on time, driving a silver Lexus and carrying a briefcase far too formal for his surroundings. He greeted them in the front office with a smile that vanished the moment Lucas displayed his credentials. "We're reopening a case involving a child named Ava Calder," Lucas said without pleasantries. "4 years ago, you signed off on a new birth certificate for a child now known as Lila Brooks. We know that certificate came from Second Star. And we know you've signed off on at least 7 other cases like it." Dr. Henshaw shifted, eyes calculating. "I was misled," he said finally. "The documents they provided looked valid. My involvement was purely administrative." Lucas stepped forward. "You're not here for excuses. We want to know who brought Ava to you, who asked you to make her someone else." Henshaw hesitated. "It wasn't the adoptive mother, it was a third party. Woman in her 40s, blonde. Sharp voice. She said the child's parents were dead. That she was the aunt." Lucas showed him a photo of Christine Grayson pulled from her DMV record. Henshaw looked at it and nodded slowly. With that confirmation, Lucas and Marissa drove straight to Christine's listed residence in a gated suburb 20 minutes outside Sarasota. The house was pristine pastel painted with flower beds that looked like magazine covers. Christine answered the door in pressed linen and perfect makeup, her smile faltering slightly when she saw the badges. "We need to talk about Julia Calder," Lucas said. Christine's eyes flickered. "The name hasn't come up in a long time." "She was paid," Lucas continued, "by you, days before Ava vanished. And we have proof you arranged her new identity through your sister's network. So I'm gonna ask you once, where is Julia Calder?" Christine's jaw tightened. "You're wrong about her," she said, arms crossed. "You didn't want to give Ava up. She was terrified. There were people threatening her. People who knew something about her husband. She wasn't running from justice. She was running for her child's life." Marissa stepped forward. "So you paid her off?" "I gave her an option," Christine said. "Leave town. Give Ava to someone who could protect her. Amelia was that person. Julia didn't want to go to the police. She didn't trust them, especially not after the threats started." Lucas's tone hardened. "And the blood on Ava's shirt, the locket hidden in the vent, that wasn't protection. That was erasure." Christine's hands told. "You didn't want it this way. Julia wanted to come back, to explain, but she never got the chance. She disappeared." Marissa echoed. "Or did someone make her disappear?" Christine whispered. "You'll have to ask Mark. He was the reason she was scared to begin with." Lucas drove in silence, hands tight on the wheel as he and Marissa headed back toward the Sarasota field office. The air in the car dense with everything Christine Grayson had just unloaded. If Julia Calder had vanished not because she was guilty but because she was afraid, then the entire trajectory of the case bent in a new direction, one that pointed toward systemic manipulation, not personal tragedy. Marissa broke the silence first. "We need the full adoption file, the real one, not what Emily handed over. Everything that went through the Department of Health, Immigration, and State." Lucas nodded. "And we need to know who signed off on it, who cleared the name Lila Brooks to exist." By the time they reached the building, the tech team had already begun cross-referencing Ava's forged documents with Second Star's flagged adoption. A single name showed up repeatedly in the birth registration and identity reassignment process: Victor Palmetto, a senior clerical officer assigned to the Miami Immigration Processing Office. A man whose name appeared in 6 other cases, all involving children now suspected of having been abducted or gone missing between 2017 and 2021. Lucas leaned over the monitor, eyes narrowing. He processed Ava's documentation, he said, but also signed for the Riley case, the Nunez twins, and that one out of Arizona, the Delgado boy. Marissa scrolled quickly. "He's been investigated twice for internal fraud. Both times the cases were dropped due to insufficient evidence. No one ever subpoenaed his personal communications." Lucas grabbed his phone. "You're changing that right now." By mid-afternoon, they had a warrant in hand. Victor Palmetto, who was still actively working, was picked up from his office just as he was about to head out for lunch. In the interview room, he sat in a government-issued chair, blazer rumpled, tie loosened, eyes darting like a man who'd spent years pretending the walls around him weren't made of glass. "You never touched the kid," he said immediately, arms crossed. "I was just the paperwork guy." Lucas paced the room slowly. "You signed off on a birth certificate for a baby that was already registered as dead by the Nebraska authorities. You used a sealed file from a flagged agency. You approved the switch to the name Lila Brooks. That's not just paperwork, Victor. That's complicity. Palmetto's jaw twitched. He was paid, I didn't ask questions. The people I worked with told me the parents were dangerous, that the kid needed to disappear. Who told you that? Marissa asked. A woman, blonde, said her name was Amelia. She showed up with all the right files, had a badge, said she was from Child Protection Services out of Jersey. Lucas exchanged a look with Marissa. There is no Amelia Grayson registered with CPS anywhere on the East Coast, he said. You got played. Palmetto shook his head. I don't care who she was. She paid in cash. Every time. Always for someone different. I was just doing what they asked. Meanwhile, Marissa had requested access to archived airport surveillance from 4 years prior. The original Ava Calder disappearance response, smaller, younger, alert. He was seen at the edge of the perimeter, nose to the ground, tail low, clearly on scent. He pulled hard toward a service exit near the back of the airport loading dock, handler trailing behind him. But just as the handler began to move with him, the radio crackled. Seconds later, the handler reached for his earpiece, hesitated, then gave Shadow the halt signal. The dog stopped reluctantly, head turning back toward the door. A minute later, the two turned and walked away. The screen blinked with a timestamp, July 3rd, 2021. Time of the alert, 2:47 a.m. Lucas rewound and watched it again. He was on her, he said. Shadow had her scent. She passed through that dock. Marissa tapped into the officer's logs for that night. Handler was Officer Darren Stone. Logged a radio call at that exact time. Report says, pulled from track due to internal system error at dispatch. Lucas raised an eyebrow. System error, that's the official code used when a decision is made by a supervisor to redirect personnel mid-CAF. Marissa explained, usually justified by security concerns, rerouting, or sometimes bureaucratic confusion. But in high-powered detection posts, there's no way to contain the sound. It's almost never done. Lucas leaned back, so someone at the top called off a dog mid-scent. And it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. They pulled Stone's file. He'd resigned 2 months after the Ava search effort ended. Moved to a smaller department in rural Iowa. No complaints filed, but notes in his exit interview hinted at unresolvable ethical conflict with procedural decisions. Lucas stared at the line. He was forced to stand down, probably told it was above his pay grade. Shadow, lying quietly at the corner of the room, lifted his head and let out a low breath. Marissa stepped over and scratched behind his ear. You tried, boy, she whispered. They just didn't let you finish. The pieces were aligning. Victor Palmetto fabricating legitimacy, Amelia orchestrating the extraction, Christine funding the disappearance, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Julia Calder, vanished not by choice but by threat. Lucas opened the timeline. 2:47 a.m. Shadow signals a live track. Minutes later, redirected. 4 hours later, Ava is officially reported missing. By that afternoon, a new file begins processing in Victor Palmetto's inbox, with a Florida contact number attached. The speed was impossible unless it was pre-planned. Someone wanted her gone, and someone higher up made sure the system couldn't catch her. Marissa checked the internal comm logs from the OMA unit that night. There's a missing transmission, she said. A 12-minute gap. Between 2:40 and 2:52 a.m., no dispatch data recorded. But before and after, everything's normal. Lucas exhaled sharply. That's a manual deletion, not a glitch. Marissa looked up slowly, and the only people who had override access to dispatch records in that region in 2021? Lucas already knew where she was going. Mark Calder. He was a contracted IT systems consultant for law enforcement infrastructure that same quarter. If Julia was scared of him, maybe she had reason. The sky over New York that morning was gunmetal gray, clouds heavy with a storm that hadn't yet arrived but lingered like a warning. And inside the terminal walls of JFK, everything felt unnaturally still. Lucas stood beside Marissa at the edge of the old baggage claim warehouse, a building now only used for overflow during holiday peaks, half abandoned most days of the year. It was here, 3 terminals over from where the duffel had been found, that Shadow had unexpectedly pulled them hours ago, nose to the ground, tail stiff, ears sharply alert, his body language unmistakable. He wasn't tracking a person this time, he was tracking memory, and it was leading them deeper into the past. The facility supervisor had reluctantly granted them access after Lucas flashed his federal badge and a warrant. The place smelled of old oil, rubber, dust, and history. They walked slowly through rows of steel shelves filled with unclaimed suitcases, dented crates, and long-forgotten packages, the air colder than outside. Shadow stopped in front of a maintenance closet at the far corner. A door half-hinged and scratched near the bottom. Something inside He whined once, then placed both front paws against the door. Lucas and Marissa exchanged a look. She pushed it open gently, revealing a small square room lined with old cleaning supplies, boxes, and a narrow vent near the top of the back wall, dust-covered but partially disturbed. Shadow sat down hard, ears locked, body frozen. Lucas reached up toward the vent and noticed that one of the metal slats was loose. With a screwdriver from a nearby toolkit, he removed the cover carefully. Inside, tucked behind a layer of fiberglass insulation, was a thin chain, a child's necklace, delicate, slightly tarnished, with a heart-shaped charm bearing the engraved name, Ava. Marissa's breath hitched. No question, Lucas sealed it in an evidence bag. "This isn't just a memory spot," he said. "This was a drop zone. Something happened here, someone took her through this warehouse, and either they lost the necklace, or they hid it. Either way, this vent wasn't opened by accident." Marissa stared at the charm. "Why would you hide something that identifies the child unless you planned for her not to be found?" Shadow sat unmoving, his gaze still locked on the wall as though he expected something or someone to emerge. Lucas called for the airport's archival records and within the hour was sifting through digital logs of employee access from 4 years ago, cross-referencing staff who clocked in overnight near Terminal C's secondary cargo section. A pattern emerged. There had been minimal staff movement in that area during the window of Ava's disappearance, except for one name that appeared consistently through the 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. window. M. Calder. Maintenance. Temporary contract. Marissa leaned over. Mark Calder, her father? Lucas nodded grimly. He never disclosed airport work in any of the original interviews. Claimed he was out of state on a sales trip, but these logs put him inside the cargo corridor the night Ava vanished. He pulled up the employee file. Mark Calder had been subcontracted for short-term maintenance through a third-party vendor, assigned to monitor HAS systems across multiple. No one had cross-checked it because the employment wasn't in his official resume, and the contract had ended abruptly 1 week after Ava's disappearance. "He was here," Lucas said quietly, "while the mother was asleep at home thinking her daughter was in the crib. He was walking these halls." Marissa's voice was flat, and he never told anyone. Lucas slammed the file closed. Because if he did, someone would have asked why. Why lie? Why place himself at the center of a security compromise zone the same night his child vanished? He looked at the necklace again. "I think he helped orchestrate it, not alone. Maybe not willingly at first, but at some point, he stopped looking for her and started erasing the trail." Marissa picked up Shadow's leash. "He's in New York now. Christine said he relocated last year." Quietly, "We can bring him in." But when they arrived at Mark Calder's listed apartment in Queens, the building superintendent informed them he hadn't been seen in days. His unit was still paid up, nothing removed, but the mail had stacked up under the door. Lucas paced the hallway outside as Marissa knocked again, harder this time. Shadow sniffed the threshold and let out a low growl. Something about the scent made him uneasy. A search warrant was expedited and within an hour they entered. The apartment was dark, sparsely furnished, a mattress on the floor, a laptop, a small stack of unopened letters. But on the wall above the desk was a corkboard with only one item pinned to it. A blurry photograph of a child at a playground, taken from a distance. The girl's back was turned, but Lucas recognized the green elephant plush in her hand instantly. Marissa picked up the photo. He was watching her, not just avoiding us. He's been following her for a while. Lucas scanned the room, checking drawers, shelves. In the closet was a small suitcase, half-packed, with a bus schedule tucked into the side pocket. The highlighted route was headed north, upstate. He was going to run, Lucas said. Or maybe just get close again. But why hide like this? Why come back after so long just to watch her from a distance? Marissa's expression was unreadable. Maybe guilt, maybe obsession, or maybe someone turned on him too. A shadow circled the apartment once, then stopped abruptly near the window, nose pressed to the glass. Outside, across the street, a figure had just disappeared into the alley. Hood up, walking fast, face turned away. Lucas rushed to the fire escape, but by the time he reached the ground, the alley was empty. No footsteps, no shadow, just air thick and silent. Then he turned in a direction that wasn't toward the street, but toward the train yard behind the building, toward the tracks. The courtroom was bright, sterile, full of the low hum of bureaucracy and quiet judgment. Yet none of that mattered to the child seated near the back corner, coloring a blue sky over a crooked house, on a page that already had been creased and erased too many times. Ava, now officially confirmed by a complete genetic profile, sat between two worlds, one drawn in crayon, the other carved in law. Lucas stood near the front beside Marissa, both silent as the presiding judge reviewed a thick stack of folders that documented the chain of custody. The forged adoption records, the forensic links, and the psychological assessments from the last 48 hours. DNA tests had confirmed with complete certainty that the little girl was Ava Calder. Her blood, her bone markers, her mitochondrial match, all conclusive. There was no mistake. But facts alone could not rebuild a childhood. And law could not rewire memory. Ava didn't remember Nebraska. She didn't remember her biological parents. To her, the world began with Emily. The bedtime stories, the quiet dinners, the gentle hand that brushed her hair after every nightmare. Emily Grayson had become mother not through birth, but through the consistency of presence. Through years of making lunch, attending school plays, and holding the silence of fear whenever Ava stirred from a dream she couldn't explain. To Ava, Julia Calder was a name on paper, and Mark Calder, who now sat alone in a holding cell pending further charges, was not a father but a stranger who had once stood across the street with a camera and a look that made her instinctively pull away. Lucas had watched many custody hearings over the years. This one hurt in a way others hadn't, because while law demanded restitution, justice here meant breaking apart something real, something forged through trauma but held together by love. Ava was technically stolen, yet she had grown into herself under a version of safety. Even if that safety had been built on deception. The court-appointed child psychologist testified that Ava showed no signs of active distress in Emily's care. In fact, the girl associated her with warmth, routine, and what she called the lighthouse, a term she used to describe her home. When asked about her birth parents, Ava's response was consistent. "I don't know them. I only know Mommy." Marissa sat forward, her hands folded. Emily lied. But she protected her. There's a difference. The judge, a woman with streaks of silver in her black hair and eyes that scanned like truth detectors, didn't disagree. But she reminded the room that the deception came at the cost of a family who had broken under the weight of loss, who had buried a child not knowing she was still breathing. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, Shadow lay curled up near the waiting area bench, refusing to move from the blanket Ava had left behind while inside. His body was slower now, joints stiff, paws graying, but his senses remained sharp. When Ava returned, escorted by an officer, Shadow lifted his head and immediately stood. He didn't bark. He simply walked over, nuzzled her hand gently, and then curled beside her feet as she sat, her drawing now forgotten on the floor. She leaned down to whisper something to him. Only the officer beside her could hear it. "You're the only one who comes when I cry at night." Shadow blinked slowly. Since being reunited, he had refused to sleep unless she did, refused to stay in a different room, and especially refused to rest when sirens sounded outside. Each time a distant ambulance passed, his body tensed, eyes wide, breath shallow. He would retreat under a table or press himself against the nearest wall. The vet said it was PTSD, rare but not impossible in aging service dogs. Something about that particular frequency, high-pitched, urgent, tied back to whatever night had carved its trauma into the marrow of his memory. Lucas had observed it himself. The moment an ambulance wailed by outside the hotel last night, Shadow had bolted upright, placing himself between the door and Ava, as if preparing to defend her from a danger only he could smell. Inside the deliberation chamber, The decision loomed larger than statutes. Julia Calder, Ava's birth mother, had never resurfaced. Her whereabouts remained unknown. All attempts to trace her following the payout from Christine Grayson had led to a motel check-in under an alias and a final withdrawal at a bus terminal in Missouri. After that, nothing. No verified sightings, no digital footprint. The best forensic reconstruction pointed to one possibility. She had planned to return but was intercepted. By whom and how remained part of the broader investigation. What that left was Mark Calder in custody, Emily Grayson under conditional review, and Ava, caught between the life she'd lived and the one she'd been denied. Lucas stepped out for air, standing beside the courthouse steps where the wind cut cleaner, colder than before. Shadow followed, staying close. Lucas looked down at the dog. "You knew all along," he murmured. "The blanket, the scent, the warehouse. You brought us here." Shadow looked up, then sat, slow and deliberate. From the courthouse speakers came a distant voice calling names. Ava would be next. Behind them, Marissa approached. "The judge will likely call for supervised transitional custody," she said. "Let Ava stay with Emily for now, but begin therapy, visitation, a gradual reintegration plan." Lucas nodded. "That's the humane call. It's not clean," Marissa added. "But maybe it's real." They turned back as the doors opened. Ava appeared with the officer beside her, holding the plush elephant in one hand and dragging her feet slightly. She didn't look at the reporters waiting across the street. She looked for Shadow. He was already walking toward her. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned, her presence commanding yet composed, the type of silence that didn't come from fear but from the weight of finality. The room was filled with more than just officers and lawyers now. Reporters sat pressed against the back wall, family representatives lingered in the hallway, and social workers flanked the seating rows, their notepads ready but unused, as if even they had decided no report could properly capture what this case had become. Ava sat on the same bench she had occupied since morning, the worn stuffed elephant held in one hand, the other resting on Shadow's thick neck. The dog now officially retired from service, but not yet released from duty. When the judge spoke, her words were deliberate and unhurried. "This court recognizes the legal and emotional complexities of the case Calder versus State regarding custody of the minor child Ava Brooks. In light of medical, psychological, and testimonial evidence submitted over the last 2 weeks, and with the well-being of the child as the paramount concern, it is the court's decision that legal guardianship remain with Emily Grayson under continued court supervision and psychological oversight." A quiet wave of air moved through the gallery. Emily didn't cry, not immediately. She simply exhaled, hands still clasped together, lips trembling with the pressure of years she had held without permission. The judge continued. "Biological father Mark Calder, currently under review for obstruction and suspected involvement in prior concealment of the child, shall retain conditional visitation rights, under monitored sessions and pending outcome of ongoing investigation." While the court does not exonerate past actions, it recognizes the importance of biological connection and emotional rehabilitation, where the child's welfare is not jeopardized. Across the aisle, Mark sat in silence, his eyes on Ava. There was no outburst, no protest, only a nod, barely perceptible but there. He had been stripped of control but given a sliver of access, and perhaps that was the only bridge he could hope to build now. The judge's gavel came down with a single, definitive strike. It was done. But for Lucas and Marissa, the story didn't end in the courtroom. The case file, though closed in its legal structure, remained open in their minds for what it said about the system, about silence, and about the strange, imperfect shape of justice. Outside, the late autumn sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Ava stood beside Emily, the child's eyes searching not for the cameras but for the one figure she trusted without explanation. Shadow, leashed only by choice now, stood just behind her, and when Ava looked back and patted her leg, he moved forward, falling into step beside her as though the badge on his collar had never been removed. Officially, the department had hosted a retirement ceremony 2 days earlier, a small gathering, quiet, not publicized. They had presented Shadow with a commemorative medal, a leather collar embossed with his service years, and a new status: retired, honorable discharge, guardianship approved. What wasn't announced publicly but approved in private chambers was the unique designation that followed, a classification rarely used, only in extraordinary cases. Shadow was granted live-in placement with Ava and Emily, not merely as a retired canine but as an approved therapeutic guardian, endorsed by both the court and Ava's medical psychologist. He was no longer just a dog, he was a witness, a bridge, a living piece of history that Ava could return to when the questions came, as they inevitably would. When she asked one day why she had two names, or why she woke up shaking at the sound of sirens she couldn't remember, Shadow would be there. Not with answers, but with presence. Lucas watched as Ava bent down and pressed her forehead against his, whispering something only the two of them heard. Shadow didn't react loudly. He didn't bark. He simply blinked, tail shifting just enough to touch the side of her shoe. Marissa turned to Lucas. "You think she'll be okay?" He didn't answer right away. "She'll never be untouched," he said finally. "But she won't be alone." Weeks passed and a quiet routine formed. Emily enrolled Ava in a nearby charter school. Therapy continued weekly. Ava's world was still delicate, built carefully like scaffolding on memory's edge, but it held. Shadow slept at the foot of her bed every night. He flinched less when ambulances passed. He ate more. He aged, but gently. Sometimes caught Ava whispering stories to him under the covers, and sometimes, in moments of stillness, on Ava's 5th birthday, her first one celebrated under her real name, Emily baked a cake shaped like a lighthouse. Just as Ava had once described, there were only 3 guests: Emily, Ava, and Shadow. No big party, no decorations. Just light and quiet and a dog who had never stopped believing there was something left to find. And somehow, that was enough. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing so you won't miss the next one. What moment hit you the hardest? Do you think justice was truly served for Ava? And by the way, where are you watching from? Drop a comment, I'd love to know.